When we think about Roman soldiers, we usually picture gleaming armor, disciplined formations, and legendary military campaigns. But there's another side to their success that rarely gets the spotlight: what they ate, how they ate it, and why their approach to food was so revolutionary that it powered one of history's most formidable fighting forces for over 5 centuries. And here's the fascinating part. Much of what those soldiers knew about food has been largely forgotten in our modern world of processed meals, fad diets, and nutritional confusion.
Hey everyone! Before we dive into the incredible food wisdom of Roman soldiers, if you're enjoying this content and want to learn more about history, health, and forgotten knowledge that can change your life today, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps us bring you more fascinating stories like this one. And don't forget to drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Alright, let's jump back 2,000 years and uncover what Roman soldiers knew about eating that might just change the way you think about your own diet today.
The Roman army wasn't fed randomly or haphazardly. Every aspect of a soldier's diet was carefully considered, tested over generations, and refined through trial and error on the battlefield. Roman military planners understood something that modern nutritionists are only now rediscovering: that food is fuel, medicine, and morale all rolled into one. A well-fed soldier was a loyal soldier, a strong soldier, and a soldier who could march 20 miles a day carrying 60 pounds of gear without collapsing. The backbone of the Roman soldier's diet was grain, specifically wheat, barley, and sometimes spelt. Each legionary received a daily ration of about 2 pounds of grain, which doesn't sound like much until you realize that grain was energy-dense, portable, and incredibly versatile. Unlike meat, which spoiled quickly in the Mediterranean heat, grain could be stored for months or even years if kept dry. It could be ground into flour and baked into bread, boiled into porridge, or mixed with water to create a kind of flatbread cooked on a hot stone. This wasn't just convenience, it was nutritional genius. Whole grains provided complex carbohydrates for sustained energy, fiber for digestive health, and a range of B vitamins that were essential for everything from muscle function to mental clarity. Roman soldiers weren't eating white bread or refined flour. They were consuming the whole grain, which meant they were getting the bran, the germ, and all the nutrients that modern milling strips away. And here's where it gets interesting. The Roman approach to grain wasn't about quick energy spikes and crashes. It was about steady, reliable fuel that could carry a man through a day of hard labor, combat, or long marches. Compare that to the typical American breakfast today: sugary cereal, white toast, or a pastry, and you start to see just how far we've drifted from the dietary wisdom that built an empire. But grain wasn't the only star of the Roman soldier's diet. He also consumed a remarkable variety of vegetables, legumes, and fruits, many of which were foraged, grown in military gardens, or purchased from local markets when the army was on campaign. Lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans were staples, providing plant-based protein, iron, and essential amino acids. These legumes were often cooked into thick stews or mixed with grain to create a hearty, balanced meal. The Roman soldier didn't need a degree in nutrition to know that combining beans and grains made a complete protein. He just knew that the combination kept him full, strong, and ready to fight. Vegetables like onions, garlic, leeks, and cabbage were eaten regularly, not just for flavor but for their medicinal properties. Garlic, in particular, was prized by the Romans for its ability to ward off illness, boost stamina, and even repel intestinal parasites, a real concern in an era before modern sanitation. Onions were valued for their anti-inflammatory properties and their ability to add flavor to otherwise bland meals. Cabbage was considered a cure-all, used to treat everything from hangovers to wounds. Roman medical texts, including those by the physician Galen, repeatedly emphasized the health benefits of these humble vegetables, and Roman soldiers ate them in quantities that would put most modern diets to shame. Then there were fruits, figs, dates, apples, pears, and grapes, which provided natural sugars for quick energy, along with vitamins and minerals that supported overall health. Dried fruits, in particular, were a favorite among soldiers because they were lightweight, didn't spoil, and could be eaten on the march. Dates, imported from North Africa and the eastern provinces, were especially popular for their intense sweetness and high caloric content. A handful of dates could provide a quick burst of energy before a battle or during a forced march, and they were far healthier than the candy bars or energy drinks we rely on today. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Roman soldier's diet was his consumption of fermented foods, particularly a condiment called garum. If you've never heard of garum, you're not alone. It's one of those ancient foods that has largely disappeared from the modern table, but in Roman times, it was everywhere. Garum was a fermented fish sauce made by layering small fish, anchovies, mackerel, or sardines, with salt and leaving the mixture to ferment in the sun for weeks or even months. The result was a pungent, umami-rich liquid that was used to flavor everything from stews to vegetables to bread. Now, before you wrinkle your nose at the idea of fermented fish sauce, consider this. Garum was packed with protein, amino acids, and beneficial probiotics that supported gut health. The fermentation process broke down the fish proteins into easily digestible peptides and created a product that was not only delicious but also incredibly nutritious. Roman soldiers consumed garum daily, either mixed into their food or diluted with water to create a drink called pasca, which we'll get to in a moment. The point is, the Romans understood the value of fermented foods long before modern science discovered the importance of gut bacteria and the microbiome. They knew that fermented foods aided digestion, boosted immunity, and even improved mood, all critical factors for men living in close quarters under stressful conditions. Compare this to the modern American diet, which is largely devoid of naturally fermented foods and instead loaded with antibiotics, preservatives, and processed ingredients that actively harm gut health, and you start to see how much we've lost. By the way, if you're finding this information valuable, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming videos on ancient wisdom and practical health tips. We've got some amazing content coming your way. Now, let's talk about pasca, the drink that fueled the Roman legions. Pasca was a simple beverage made by diluting vinegar, usually wine vinegar, with water and sometimes adding herbs or a bit of honey for flavor. It sounds unappetizing, but pasca was actually a brilliant solution to several problems. First, it made questionable water safe to drink. In an age before water purification, adding vinegar to water killed harmful bacteria and made it safer for consumption. Second, pasca was refreshing and hydrating, especially in hot climates. The acidity helped replace electrolytes lost through sweat, much like modern sports drinks, but without the added sugars and artificial ingredients. Third, pasca was cheap and easy to produce, which mattered when you were trying to keep hundreds of thousands of soldiers supplied across a vast empire. Roman soldiers drank pasca daily, often mixing in a bit of garum for added flavor and nutrition. The result was a beverage that provided hydration, electrolytes, beneficial acids, and even a small amount of protein from the garum. It's a far cry from the sugary sodas, energy drinks, and flavored waters that dominate modern beverage aisles, and it's worth asking, were the Romans onto something we've forgotten? The evidence suggests they were. Vinegar, particularly apple cider vinegar, has been making a comeback in health circles for its purported benefits: improved digestion, blood sugar regulation, and even weight management. The Romans were drinking it 2,000 years ago, not as a trendy health hack, but as a practical, everyday choice. Another key element of the Roman soldier's diet was olive oil, which was used generously in cooking and even consumed on its own. Olive oil was more than just a cooking fat. It was a source of healthy monounsaturated fats, vitamin E, and anti-inflammatory compounds that supported cardiovascular health, joint health, and overall vitality. Roman soldiers often received a daily ration of olive oil, which they used to dress vegetables, dip bread, or simply drink straight for a quick calorie boost. This might sound strange to modern ears, but remember, these men were burning thousands of calories a day through physical labor and combat. They needed calorie-dense foods, and olive oil was one of the healthiest ways to meet that need. Compare that to the modern reliance on processed vegetable oils, corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, which are high in inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids and often chemically extracted and refined. The Romans stuck with olive oil, which is now recognized as one of the cornerstones of the Mediterranean diet, widely considered one of the healthiest dietary patterns in the world. It's ironic, isn't it? The food that powered Roman legions is now celebrated as a superfood, yet most Americans consume it far less than the Romans did. Now, you might be wondering, what about meat? Didn't Roman soldiers eat meat? The answer is yes, but not as much as you might think, and not in the way we consume it today. Meat was a luxury for Roman soldiers, not a daily staple. When it was available, it was usually pork, chicken, or occasionally game meat like venison or wild boar. Beef was rare because cattle were more valuable as draft animals than as food. Fish was more common, especially in coastal regions, and it was often preserved through salting, smoking, or drying to extend its shelf life. But here's the important point. Roman soldiers didn't center their diet around meat the way modern Western diets do. They got the majority of their protein from plant sources, legumes, grains, and vegetables, with meat serving as an occasional supplement rather than the main event. This wasn't due to ethical or environmental concerns. It was pure practicality. Meat was expensive, difficult to preserve, and required significant resources to produce. Plants, on the other hand, were cheap, abundant, and easy to store. And yet, despite eating far less meat than the average American today, Roman soldiers were incredibly strong, fit, and capable of extraordinary physical feats. They didn't suffer from protein deficiency or muscle wasting. In fact, skeletal remains of Roman soldiers show robust bone density, well-developed musculature, and relatively few signs of the degenerative diseases that plague modern populations. How is that possible? The answer lies in the quality and diversity of their plant-based diet. By combining grains, legumes, vegetables, and small amounts of animal protein, Roman soldiers were getting all the essential amino acids, vitamins, and minerals they needed to thrive. They weren't obsessing over protein shakes or counting macros. They were simply eating a varied, whole foods-based diet that naturally provided everything their bodies required. It's a lesson that modern nutrition science is slowly relearning. You don't need massive amounts of meat to be strong and healthy. You need a balanced, diverse diet that includes plenty of plants. Another fascinating aspect of Roman military food culture was the emphasis on communal eating and food preparation. Roman soldiers didn't just show up to a mess hall and grab a tray of pre-made food. They were organized into small units called contubernia, typically consisting of 8 men who shared a tent and cooked together. Each contubernium was responsible for preparing its own meals, which meant that soldiers had to know how to cook, how to forage, how to bake bread, and how to make the most of limited ingredients. This wasn't just a practical arrangement. It was a way of building camaraderie, teaching self-sufficiency, and ensuring that every soldier had a stake in the success of his unit. Cooking together meant sharing knowledge, stories, and skills. It meant learning to appreciate simple, wholesome food and taking pride in a well-made meal. It also meant that soldiers understood where their food came from and how to make it last. They weren't passive consumers. They were active participants in their own nutrition. Contrast this with the modern American relationship with food, where most people have little idea how their food is produced, processed, or prepared. We've outsourced our food preparation to factories, restaurants, and delivery apps, and in the process, we've lost the skills, knowledge, and connection that made eating a meaningful, nourishing experience. Roman soldiers, despite living 2,000 years ago, had a far healthier and more sustainable relationship with food than most of us do today. Another key element of Roman food wisdom was the concept of moderation and simplicity. Roman soldiers didn't overeat. They didn't indulge in lavish feasts on a regular basis. They ate enough to meet their energy needs and no more. Their meals were simple, often consisting of just a few ingredients prepared in straightforward ways: boiled grains, roasted vegetables, bread dipped in olive oil, a bit of cheese or dried fish. There were no elaborate sauces, no complex recipes, no need for celebrity chefs or cooking shows. The food was functional, nourishing, and satisfying. And here's the thing: that simplicity was a strength, not a weakness. By keeping meals simple, Roman soldiers avoided the digestive issues, food allergies, and metabolic problems that come from overly processed, overly complex diets. They ate food that their bodies recognized and could efficiently digest. They didn't consume artificial additives, preservatives, or chemicals. They didn't eat foods engineered to be hyperpalatable and addictive. They ate real food, and their bodies responded with health, strength, and resilience. Compare that to the modern American diet, which is characterized by excess, complexity, and artificiality. We eat too much, we eat too often, and we eat foods that barely resemble anything our ancestors would recognize as edible. We've traded simplicity for convenience, and we're paying the price in skyrocketing rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and other diet-related illnesses. The Romans didn't have these problems, not because they had better medicine or genetics, but because they had better food. Now, I want to address a common misconception. The idea that Roman soldiers were uneducated brutes who ate whatever was thrown at them without any understanding of nutrition. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Roman military was a highly organized, professional institution, and food was taken very seriously. Roman military manuals, medical texts, and historical accounts are filled with discussions of diet, nutrition, and the importance of proper food supply. The Romans understood that an army marches on its stomach, and they invested enormous resources into ensuring that their soldiers were well fed. They built supply chains that stretched across continents, established farms and granaries near military bases, and even developed early forms of food preservation and packaging. They experimented with different diets and observed the results, noting which foods made soldiers stronger, which foods caused illness, and which foods improved morale. In other words, the Romans were doing nutrition science 2,000 years before we had the tools to study it formally. They were empirical observers who learned through experience, and their conclusions, eat whole grains, lots of vegetables, fermented foods, olive oil, and moderate amounts of meat, align almost perfectly with what modern research tells us about healthy eating. So why did we forget all of this? How did we go from a diet that sustained one of history's greatest civilizations to a diet that's literally killing us? The answer is complicated, but it largely comes down to industrialization, globalization, and the rise of processed food. Starting in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, food production began to shift away from small-scale, local farms toward large-scale industrial operations. New technologies allowed for the mass production of refined grains, sugars, and oils. Food became cheaper and more abundant, but also less nutritious. The process of refining wheat into white flour, for example, removed most of the fiber, vitamins, and minerals, leaving behind empty calories. The same thing happened with sugar, which went from a rare luxury to a ubiquitous ingredient in almost everything we eat. Industrialization also changed the way we think about food. Instead of viewing food as nourishment, we began to see it as a commodity, something to be produced as cheaply and efficiently as possible. Taste, convenience, and shelf life became more important than nutrition. Food companies learned how to engineer products that were hyperpalatable, designed to trigger cravings and encourage overeating, but offered little in the way of actual nourishment. At the same time, we lost the cultural knowledge and skills that previous generations took for granted. We stopped cooking at home. We stopped growing our own food. We stopped preserving, fermenting, and preparing food from scratch. We outsourced all of these tasks to corporations, and in the process, we lost control over what we eat. The result is a food system that's optimized for profit, not health, and a population that's suffering the consequences. But here's the good news. The wisdom of the Roman soldier's diet isn't lost forever. It's still there, waiting to be rediscovered. And the principles are simple enough that anyone can start applying them today. First, prioritize whole grains over refined grains. Choose brown rice, whole wheat, barley, oats, or quinoa instead of white bread, white rice, or processed cereals. Whole grains provide sustained energy, fiber, and a wide range of nutrients that refined grains lack. Second, eat more legumes. Beans, lentils, chickpeas, and peas are inexpensive, versatile, and packed with protein, fiber, and essential minerals. They're also incredibly filling, which makes them a great tool for weight management. Third, load up on vegetables, especially the humble, everyday varieties that the Romans loved. Onions, garlic, cabbage, leeks, carrots, and leafy greens. These vegetables are nutrient-dense, anti-inflammatory, and support everything from digestion to immune function. Fourth, incorporate fermented foods into your diet. Sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurt, kefir, miso, and yes, even fish sauce or vinegar-based condiments can all help support a healthy gut microbiome. Start small if you're not used to fermented foods, and gradually increase your intake as your taste buds adjust. Fifth, use olive oil as your primary cooking fat. Ditch the processed vegetable oils and embrace the healthy fats that have been nourishing people for thousands of years. Sixth, drink more water and less sugar. If you want to get creative, try making your own version of pasca by adding a splash of apple cider vinegar to your water. It's refreshing, hydrating, and good for digestion. Seventh, eat meat in moderation. You don't have to become a vegetarian, but try shifting the focus of your meals away from large portions of meat toward more plant-based proteins and vegetables. Use meat as a flavoring or a side dish rather than the centerpiece. Eighth, keep meals simple. You don't need complicated recipes or exotic ingredients to eat well. A bowl of lentil soup, a piece of whole grain bread with olive oil, a simple salad. These are the kinds of meals that sustained empires, and they can sustain you too. Ninth, cook at home as much as possible. Learning to prepare your own food gives you control over what you eat, saves money, and reconnects you with the cultural tradition of cooking that we've largely abandoned. And 10th, eat with others. Share meals, share recipes, share the experience of eating. Food is more than fuel. It's connection, culture, and community. The Romans understood this, and we need to remember it. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. This all sounds great, but isn't it impractical? Don't whole grains and legumes take longer to cook? Isn't fresh produce more expensive? Doesn't cooking at home require time and effort that most of us don't have? These are fair questions, and I'm not going to pretend that eating like a Roman soldier is as easy as grabbing fast food or popping a frozen dinner in the microwave. But here's the thing. The extra time and effort are worth it. The return on investment in terms of health, energy, longevity, and quality of life is enormous. And once you develop the habits and skills, it becomes second nature. You don't have to overhaul your entire diet overnight. Start with 1 or 2 changes. Maybe swap white rice for brown rice, or add a can of chickpeas to your salad. Gradually build from there. And remember, the Romans didn't have grocery stores, refrigerators, or modern conveniences. They cooked over open fires, ground grain by hand, and preserved food using methods that required significant effort. If they could do it, we can certainly manage with the tools and resources we have today. There's also a broader point to be made here about cultural memory and the importance of learning from history. We live in a society that's obsessed with the new, the innovative, the cutting edge. We're constantly chasing the next superfood, the next diet trend, the next nutritional breakthrough. But sometimes, the best answers aren't found in the future. They're found in the past. The Romans figured out how to feed millions of people, soldiers, civilians, slaves, across a vast and diverse empire, and they did it using principles that are just as valid today as they were 2,000 years ago. By studying their approach to food, we're not engaging in nostalgia or romanticizing the past. We're recovering practical, evidence-based wisdom that can help us navigate the dietary chaos of the modern world. And it's not just the Romans, of course. Every traditional culture developed its own food wisdom, its own ways of eating that supported health and longevity. The Mediterranean diet, the Okinawan diet, the traditional diets of indigenous peoples around the world, all of these share common features. They're based on whole, minimally processed foods. They emphasize plants over meat. They include fermented foods and healthy fats, and they're eaten in the context of community and tradition. The specific ingredients might vary, but the principles are remarkably consistent. And they all stand in stark contrast to the modern industrial diet that's now spreading around the globe, bringing with it epidemics of chronic disease. Let me share a few more specific examples of Roman food practices that have been vindicated by modern science. Take the Roman love of vinegar, for instance. Recent studies have shown that consuming vinegar before or with a meal can help regulate blood sugar levels, reduce insulin spikes, and improve insulin sensitivity. This is particularly important for people with diabetes or prediabetes, but it's also relevant for anyone who wants to avoid the energy crashes and cravings that come from blood sugar swings. The Romans didn't know about insulin, but they knew that vinegar made them feel good, and they drank it daily. Or consider the Roman emphasis on fermented fish products like garum. Modern research has revealed that fermented fish is an excellent source of bioavailable peptides, which are short chains of amino acids that the body can easily absorb and use. These peptides have been shown to have anti-inflammatory, immune-boosting, and even mood-enhancing effects. The Romans were consuming these compounds every single day, and it's likely that this contributed to their resilience and endurance. Then there's the Roman practice of eating large amounts of fiber-rich foods, whole grains, legumes, and vegetables. We now know that dietary fiber is essential for gut health, weight management, cardiovascular health, and even mental health. Fiber feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut, which in turn produce short-chain fatty acids that reduce inflammation, support the immune system, and even influence brain function. The Romans were getting upwards of 50 to 70 grams of fiber per day, while the average American gets less than 15. Is it any wonder that gut-related issues, IBS, Crohn's disease, leaky gut, are epidemic in modern society? The Romans didn't have these problems because they ate a diet that naturally supported gut health. Another interesting aspect of Roman food culture was the use of herbs and spices, not just for flavor but for their medicinal properties. Romans commonly used herbs like rosemary, thyme, oregano, sage, and mint, all of which have potent antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial compounds. These herbs were added to soups, stews, and even drinks, providing both flavor and health benefits. Modern research has confirmed that many of these herbs can help fight infections, reduce inflammation, support digestion, and even improve cognitive function. The Romans were using food as medicine in a very real and practical way, and we've largely lost that knowledge in favor of a pharmaceutical approach to health. But maybe the most important lesson from the Roman soldier's diet is the concept of food as a shared, communal experience. Romans didn't eat alone. They didn't eat in their cars, in front of screens, or while multitasking. They ate together, in groups, as part of a social ritual that reinforced bonds and built community. This wasn't just about tradition. It had real health benefits. Eating in a relaxed, social setting improves digestion, reduces stress, and increases satisfaction and satiety. When you eat quickly, alone, or while distracted, your body stays in a state of stress, which impairs digestion and can lead to overeating. The Romans understood this intuitively, and they structured their meals accordingly. We've lost that in our fast-paced, individualistic culture, and it's one of the reasons why so many people struggle with their relationship with food. Eating has become a transaction, a chore, something to be done as quickly as possible so we can move on to the next task. But food is meant to be enjoyed, savored, and shared. It's meant to nourish not just the body but also the soul. The Romans knew this, and we need to remember it. Now, I want to address one more point before we wrap up, and that's the question of sustainability. The Roman soldier's diet wasn't just healthy. It was also environmentally sustainable in ways that our modern diet is not. By eating primarily plant-based foods with meat as an occasional supplement, Roman soldiers had a much smaller environmental footprint than the average American today. Producing meat, especially beef, requires enormous amounts of land, water, and feed, and it generates significant greenhouse gas emissions. Plant-based foods, on the other hand, are far more efficient and sustainable. The Romans didn't make this choice for environmental reasons, they made it for practical and economic reasons, but the result was the same. A diet that could feed millions of people without depleting the land or exhausting resources. Compare that to the modern American diet, which is heavily reliant on industrial meat production, which is one of the leading drivers of deforestation, water pollution, and climate change. We're eating ourselves and the planet into a crisis, and one of the solutions is staring us in the face. Eat more plants, less meat, just like the Romans did. It's not about becoming vegan or vegetarian, unless that's what you want. It's about shifting the balance, recognizing that a diet centered on plants is healthier for us and for the planet. The Romans figured this out 2,000 years ago, and we're only now beginning to catch up. So where does all of this leave us? What can we, as modern Americans living in the 21st century, learn from the dietary practices of Roman soldiers who lived and died 2 millennia ago? The answer, I think, is both humbling and empowering. It's humbling because it forces us to admit that despite all our scientific advances, all our technology, all our wealth and abundance, we've somehow managed to create a food system that's making us sick. We've lost sight of basic nutritional principles that were once common knowledge. We've allowed corporations to hijack our food supply and our taste buds in the name of profit. And we've paid the price in poor health, chronic disease, and a disconnection from the very thing that should nourish and sustain us. But it's also empowering, because it shows us that the solutions are within reach. We don't need expensive supplements, complicated meal plans, or exotic superfoods. We don't need to wait for the next nutritional breakthrough or miracle cure. We just need to return to the basics. The same basics that sustained Roman soldiers, that built civilizations, that allowed our ancestors to thrive in far harsher conditions than we face today. Eat whole grains. Eat legumes. Eat lots of vegetables. Use olive oil. Include fermented foods. Drink water. Eat meat in moderation. Keep meals simple. Cook at home. Share food with others. These aren't revolutionary ideas. They're ancient wisdom, tested and proven over thousands of years. And they work. They work not because they're trendy or because some influencer is promoting them, but because they align with human biology, with the way our bodies are designed to function. The Roman soldier's diet is proof that you don't need to be perfect to be healthy. You don't need to count every calorie, track every macro, or stress over every ingredient. You just need to eat real food most of the time in reasonable amounts, and your body will take care of the rest. It's that simple and that profound. So the next time you're standing in a grocery store, overwhelmed by options and unsure of what to buy, ask yourself, what would a Roman soldier eat? The answer will point you toward the produce section, the bulk bins, the olive oil, the whole grains, the simple, unprocessed foods that have nourished humans for millennia. And if you're worried about taste, about satisfaction, about whether simple foods can really be fulfilling, remember this: Roman soldiers weren't miserable. They weren't suffering through bland, joyless meals. They appreciated good food, they took pride in their cooking, and they found satisfaction in simple, well-prepared dishes. Food doesn't have to be complicated or expensive to be delicious and nourishing. Sometimes the best meals are the simplest ones. A piece of fresh bread, a drizzle of olive oil, a ripe tomato, a handful of olives. These are the flavors that the Romans loved, and they're just as satisfying today as they were 2,000 years ago. In closing, let me say this: we live in a time of unprecedented abundance and unprecedented confusion when it comes to food. We have access to more varieties of food than any generation in history, and yet we're more uncertain than ever about what to eat. We're bombarded with conflicting advice, fad diets, and nutritional dogma, and it's no wonder that so many people feel lost. But history offers us a compass. By looking back at the dietary practices of successful civilizations like Rome, we can cut through the noise and focus on what actually works. The Roman soldier's diet wasn't a fad or a trend. It was a practical, time-tested approach to eating that supported strength, health, and longevity. It was built on principles that are just as relevant today as they were in ancient times, and it offers us a roadmap for navigating the dietary chaos of the modern world. So take what you've learned here and put it into practice. Start with small changes, build sustainable habits, and trust that your body knows what to do with real, nourishing food. You don't have to be a Roman soldier to benefit from their wisdom. You just have to be willing to remember what they knew and what we've forgotten. And that's something worth remembering the next time you sit down to eat, whether it's a simple bowl of lentil soup or a piece of whole grain bread dipped in olive oil, knowing that you're nourishing yourself the way humans have done for thousands of years, and that's a powerful thing.